Welcome, transhumans, and all of our carbon units and our silicon units to our talk, a brief class talk for Wilmette Institute on transhumanism and the Baha'i faith and the Baha'i views of death and immortality and how they relate to transhumanism. This is for Unit 5 of our theology course for our accreditation efforts for Wilmette Institute. And I guess I'll get going on our sharing here. But in the meantime, before we get started sharing, I have an interesting story I just heard from my daughter, which she said that she just read a story that a woman in Florida abducted, actually kidnapped, a life prolongation scientist and held him hostage because she wanted him to make her dog immortal. Now, this would be funny and strange if it wasn't true. Truth is stranger than fiction. But the fascinating thing about it is that when you think about it, is that it really ties and relates to the whole theme of death, transhumanism, immortality, and I'll try to relate it to the Baha'i faith also, which is the idea that we want to create machines that we can upload our consciousness into or put chips in ourselves to prolong our life and issues like that. And I know some of the pushback in the units we've been studying have been who, as Abdul Baha said, who would want to come back here? This life is horrible. It's a lot of work to pretend we're a body when we're actually a spiritual being. But we're going to just briefly go through the key ideas in this unit: suffering with desire, ignorance, transhumanism, singularity, which is a global issue, evolution, what is human nature according to the Baha'i faith, and then eternal felicity, bliss, happiness, the word and will of God. Our last unit, we talked a little bit about the two arrows, what we do with what we receive. And we're going to start out with that also today in terms of suffering. And the idea in Buddhism of suffering is that when we really reach a desireless state, desirelessness, as it's called, desire, of course, is tanha, and suffering is dukkha, and avidya is ignorance. So when you look at ignorance, it's like, what has desire got to do with ignorance? Well, ignorance is ignorance of the impermanence of this life, that we think that we are not in the midst of the wheel of continual change, and ourself and ego itself is also impermanent, and we try to hang on to it. So that ignorance is also another form of desire. It's desire for attachment to things that are transitory, which causes suffering. So when the Buddha said that it's both desire and ignorance that cause suffering, it's a very much the same thing. And of course, freedom from all save God is the Baha'i view of detachment and desirelessness. Baha'u'llah makes statements like forget all else save God, detach yourself from the world, sanctify yourself, close one eye and open the other, blind yourself to the world and all that's in, and turn your sight to the sacred beauty of the beloved. Desire not save what he desires for you. Follow not your passions. Think not, sever, prefer not your will to the will of God. So all these things are ways of being freed, freedom from suffering, hate, anger, pain, self and ego, thought, motive, actions, heaven, the world, everything. So when you think, okay, what does desirelessness mean to me personally? It means being freed, freeing ourselves from all these attachments, including to our thoughts and to our feelings. And people say, well, if you're totally, like our chat is lighting up sometimes when we do these, and they say, well, what do you want me to sit on top of a mountain and do nothing? No, it's seek first the kingdom and then all things will be added to you. So this will of God. Freedom is the path to immortality, and that's how it ties to the whole idea of transhumanism. Because humans, we are spiritual beings, according to the Baha'i faith, and our bodies are a temporary learning classroom for the soul. So to try to prolong our life for 300 years or 500 years or whatever is basically denying the fact that this is a brief stay to get us ready for our eternal home. And there's nothing wrong with technology and trying to prolong life and make life, especially the quality of life, better for the whole planet. But if it gets to be extreme, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later in terms of what it means in terms of the bigger picture of not just desirelessness from the standpoint of not wanting more life, but being content with what we're given and moving on with trust in the will of God. But also, what about our own attitudes towards the artificial intelligence that we create? Are we creating it to create new weapons to succeed, competing one against the other? And do we even care what happens to our silicon children? These beings or these future manifestations of humanity programmed into silicon, what are they evolving to be? Are we evolving them ourselves, or is it all part of the will of God? And what will they evolve into? And what will be our relationship with them? Well, when you get to ethics, it's interesting because people say the fear of death is what drives everything that's got to do with AI. And hereafter, we've competitively slaughtered, 25 or so other hominid species to get where we're at now. We're worried about, gee, what are our silicon children going to do to us if they become more intelligent than we are? Well, how do we raise our silicon children, and how are we currently programming our human children? Just to turn a phrase and switch the frame of reference a little bit for a second. Well, what it is that after complete competition as humans and raising children across the planet in many different global ways that are turning out anything from immoral to amoral, which science is amoral, how would we raise our silicon children? In other words, how do we give our children ethics? And when we say rules or ethics, if we look at moral, immoral, amoral, and what I'm saying is AI moral, which is we need to give morality to our silicon children with a global understanding of what ethics are, not just rules like Asimov's, rules of robotics, don't harm yourself, don't harm others. 3 or 4 rules aren't going to bracket in algorithms as AI gets smarter and smarter. Everyone sort of agrees we're going to need some kind of unified global standard of ethics. And the Baha'i faith is just positioning perfectly. It's all coming to Baha'u'llah's message of what is needed in all kinds of fields, and AI and transhumanism is no difference. It's certainly needed in warfare and in nuclear threats and all that. We can see it coming, and it's more and more becoming necessary in technology as well. So when we think of science, religion, science, and spirit, it is an issue of either unity or division. And the morals, we have a chance to teach our silicon children better morals than we have programmed our current planetary children with, which is, morality doesn't matter, or pick your own rules. We tried that with AI, and we're going to be in real trouble. Now we are living in an illusion of time right now, but what happens to the whole idea of death and evolution if we get rid of time? If we say we are timeless beings, we get that freedom from the whole idea of death. Death, as Jesus said, death thou shalt die. And death then is applied to self and ego, where we seek first the kingdom and then all else will be added to us. So get to that state first, and then deal with, okay, how are we going to deal with the details of getting it right? In other words, science we can look at as doing things right. doing it in the right order, optimizing the mathematics, creating flawless systems, and look at religion or spirit as doing the right things. We have to both do things right and do the right things. Otherwise, our spiritual systems are going to be just superstition, or our, as Baha'u'llah says, or our scientific systems will end up in destruction of the whole planet. We talked a lot in this unit about the metaphors of what is human nature. We'll look at that in a second a little more. But we use both two metaphors, both a bird escaping the cage of the body at death, or transition, transformation, and as the child in the womb unable to imagine this world any more than we can imagine the next world. This goes to the divine reality of human nature, or an angel animating a handful of dust, as Adib Taherzadeh liked to speak of the human experience, the dual natures of a handful of dust and an angelic spiritual being. So if we go more towards the singularity, as we just said, are we going to be doing world building or cyber warfare with our silicon children? And these two systems and two choices, followed by Abdu'l-Baha saying that Baha'u'llah's bounties in science have gone to all the fields of science, including weapons. So we can use our silicon children to fight each other and destroy each other, and give them the tools to maybe destroy all of us, as kind of systems science from the military looks at it. Or we can look at Donella Meadows' view, God bless her soul, on society building and world building, that AI can actually help us build better and new societies around models that are centered in character and ethics, in addition to technology. And that's the blending of science and religion. But this is a global challenge. We can't have little pockets of countries that look at it one way and others that look at the other way, because that'll turn into competition, because then the argument will come up, and the logical, why should we have kindly, ethical AIs if they don't? If they're going to come in and squash us, we need a mean one too. That whole idea of unity absolutely is needed. Otherwise, we'll not make any progress. In terms of evolution, this is something we could call Baha'i spiral dynamics. And I'm taking that term from Dr. Jenna Kodadad's book. And we'll show you this when we're past these exhibits, which is called The Dynamics of Growth. And she shows the linear, the cyclical, and the spiral. And we are now in the spiral transformation, not just the linear growth or the cyclical evolution. So evolution itself has become very different, in that we're taking a huge transformative leap right now. The old is being completely thrown away and the new is completely rolled out, as Baha'u'llah says. So we'll look further at the mathematics of that, but basically we're in a system now that will not go back. It's upward spiraling and going to its destiny. Again, human nature, we are in reality spiritual beings, not material beings, even though we have to balance the spiritual and the physical. When we reach the desireless state and freed all but the love of God, we assume a celestial form sanctified from time and place, and at one with the designed self and will. All the scientific progress of all the worlds of God is channeled through detached holy beings, these souls that have had a physical existence and ascend to the celestial realm, purified and pure channels for the love of God to all of the worlds. And these new inventions, all the amazing wonders of this age, this Baha'i age, are being seen and channeled through those spiritual beings, which includes every one of you watching this and thinking about this. That's our destiny, is to have that effect. Finally, the word and will of God, in that modality, character is everything, the mirror of the names and attributes of God, recognition of the manifestation, reflection of the infinite divine names and attributes, and an eternity that makes death a messenger of joy. And this is really kind of the key to the whole idea of how does the Baha'i faith relate to the current ideas of transhumanism. And those current ideas have a lot in common with the whole Baha'i idea that death is a joyful transition, and it's not something that we need to take extraordinary efforts to try to avoid our natural progress into the spiritual worlds. In fact, this is flipped around in a most astonishing way when Baha'u'llah talks about the next world to the small extent that he can, by saying, if we fully reveal what spiritual beings you are and what this is all about, there will be mass suicides. No one will want to stay here. So the dichotomy and difference between, oh my gosh, I've got to live in this body as long as I can and part myself out and have every type of chip in my brain, or even raise our spiritual children and then sacrifice them so my brain can be loaded into their brain and get another few years out of this physical existence, gets to be absolutely ludicrous when you see Baha'u'llah's statements that if you even got a glimpse of the next world, you wouldn't spend another more instant here. So that dichotomy is something that's very important and to keep in mind when we're looking at the whole picture of human evolution and transhumanism, because we were put here to both keep a progressive, evolving, upward spiraling civilization going in the physical world, and individually our spiritual beings to evolve eternally and immortally. So in terms of, this is Jenna's book, it's beautiful, The Dynamics of Growth. And we get to chapter 6? This is where she uses the courses of history and human evolution. And she's Dr. Kodadad is a molecular biologist. So she's coming from the scientific side, but talking about the scientific principles that are at work with the worldwide changes brought about by the advancement of the Baha'i faith. So this is a great book. You've got to get it. It's wonderful. But these are just a couple of you can see there's the linear version of history and time and evolution, the cyclical version, and then there's all kinds of neat mathematical analogies, and then the spiral dynamics version over here of viewing that frame of reference, that frame for the ascending spiral of the course of history. And we live daily with the sine curve, which is the cyclical, and that's one of the most difficult to understand. I've got several books we use with our kids with linear algebra. This one is How Round is Your Circle, which is kind of fun. That's engineering versus physics and scientists and how they look at it. And the other one is Circling Your Square. And a lot of the exams before undergrad try to move circles in different coordinate systems, and that's one of the hardest type of math that new students can do, because the circle is far more complex than we think about it when you start changing coordinate systems and get into hyperspheres, etc. So to kind of close up the whole idea of transhumanism, I mentioned we had moral, immoral, amoral, and amoral, which is we're saying, okay, what is the new morality that we want to bring? If we can't do it globally, it's not going to work. That's the real key. And some of the things that were argued in terms of the videos and the readings, where it said AI will never surpass humans because something lesser can't create something greater. The thing they missed is the Baha'i principle of consultation. People are stupid. Persons and teams are brilliant. As an individual, what can we do? We can contribute, but the real fruit of humanity is consultation. When teams get together, who started AlphaGo? Who started AlphaZero? Who started AlphaFold? Teams. So you got 100, 200, 1,000 minds, brilliant minds going into creating our silicon children. Of course, they're surpassing us in many, many ways, and they will continue to do so, especially with deep reinforcement learning and other techniques that will allow them to self-teach and it's one of our really bright students made a point and said, well, hey, so what? The machines aren't quite sure of all the processes they're using. They're just growing and evolving. We're not sure in our little strip of cerebral cortex, all the calculus we're doing inside of our heads. And that's true. Eye-hand coordination itself is Kronecker matrices, which is basically matrix calculus. And we're only scratching the surface of how that works in our own brains with our robotics. So in the deep recesses of this wonderfully programmed computer that Baha'u'llah gave us in these little compact heads, there's a huge amount of unknowable math going on. And in fact, the reality of God is in our inmost essences, Baha'u'llah says. So it's going to be permanently unknowable from that standpoint. So again, I want to thank you for taking time to go over some of the ideas in transhumanism that we're covering. And if you want to see any of the graphics, you know, graphics are our thing. We love the graphics and trying to get them to help in terms of greater understanding and more fun and enjoyment and bliss and happiness in life. And hopefully the idea of the twin arrows and now the idea of desirelessness, we can continue to look at desirelessness for our whole life. Because you say, what's motivating me? How can you be freed from motive? Freed from motives is merging our will with the will of the beloved. So a lot of this is a huge letting go process, but it's really subtle. So when you think, why did I do that? Are these steps being driven by the beloved, or why am I doing this? It usually comes down to some kind of need or desire. So, okay, if bliss and immortality is the desireless state, it comes down to hierarchical recursion also, and it becomes really meta, because that means that I don't even desire desirelessness. Well, of course, because you're being freed from thinking and thoughts, and that's streaming also. So how do these all tie to our silicon children? Probably sooner or later they'll be teaching us this. That's probably how it ties. So anyway, please put any questions in your comments. I've got questions from the chat that I'll be answering in the comments, and I'll be putting links in the description in the chat for all of the visuals if you want to go over any of them. Thank you again.